Deputy Captain Connolly.
Stocha tá talan faoi leithigh teastáil óráidí dhéanamh do cheomra atá folamh ach stocha na daoine is tábhachtaí tá siad in san gallery Pibli agus Soália ag breathnú ar an telefís, so bíchas le dia go bhfuil an rud seo ag gála maith. Alaskan Crawler, got a míle má go a sucht an deis a bheith agam cant faoin bille airgeadis. And I have to agree with my colleague Deputy Richard Byde Barrett that it's unjust and unfair and it's an absolute waste of a golden opportunity. We were all elected to look at matters in a different way. I have repeatedly said in this chamber that we weren't asked to reduce taxes. It's an insult to have a debate around the budget as to how to deal with a fiscal space in terms of a tiny reduction in the universal social charge, which puts €1 or two into workers' pockets, as opposed to looking at the fiscal space and the other uncollected taxes that we require in order to provide services. Last week, or the week before, on the Public Accounts Committee, the Social Welfare came in and made a presentation in relation to their budget, which is, I think, 19.7 or 19.9 billion. And in the course of that debate, it was established that for the figures available in 2014, 40% of this country would be living in poverty without social welfare payments. And yet the debate in relation to social welfare is not, number one, that 40% of the social welfare comes from direct social insurance funds and the other 60% comes from our taxes. But the debate is around fraud in social welfare, even though it occupies a minute part of the social welfare budget. And indeed, I brought in the paper and I bring it in again today because I'm coming back to the Finance Act in terms of tax evasion. And here we have the local paper crack down on fraudsters and the actual Gardaí on the street stopping cars and trucks in Galway to curb social welfare fraud and tax evasion. Of course, that's for the ordinary person. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands there, or at the maximum a million or two. And then we compare that to the massive tax evasion that's been referred to on a continuous basis by those of us proudly on the left and those in Sinn Féin as well, who have highlighted, and indeed my colleague Tommy Bruin has paid tribute to the three deputies in particular who have highlighted the misuse of the Section 110 and other tax loopholes. And it is from that type of new politics on this side of the House that the debate has slightly changed and focused the government's attention in a minimal way in relation to dealing with tax evasion and somehow trying to change the debate or the G-Sportucht onto what will make us a more equal country. And to stop what Joan Burton has referred to, she said that we reluctantly pay tax. I proudly pay tax. And anybody I know proudly pays tax. But what we're looking for in return are services. We're looking for a health service and we're looking for housing. And that takes me directly to the Finance Bill itself and Section 8 in relation to the grant for first-time buyers. And just about every economist in the country has said that this will add to the price of houses. And they've already been quoted, so I'll just quickly quote from them again. Davy Stockbrokers has revised upwards its forecast, its growth forecast, and its house prices are expected to grow at a rate of 7% rather than 5%. In relation to the rental sector, we have the Secure Rents campaign coming together, made up of 5 unions, and the Uplift online campaign, absolutely begging the government to interfere in the rental market because the prices and the rents are rising by up to 40%. Again, absolute no measures in this finance bill to deal with that, which is bad enough because there are no simple solutions. However, I would have expected a debate about the housing crisis and the rise in rents, which are just astronomical. And again, if I take Galway, and before I do that, just to give an up-to-date figure from Savills, who say that almost 1 million, and to be precise, I think it's 856,100 people are now relying utterly on the private rental sector. That's 856,100, with absolutely no security of tenure and with the rents going up on a daily basis. And indeed, I want to mention research by Dr. Pádraig McKenna in Ulster Nahéireann in Gallia. August, he has pointed out that the rate of evictions for non-payment of rent is actually higher than the evictions for the non-payment of mortgage. And while the mortgage arrears are in crisis, certainly the evictions for rent arrears is higher and more acute, and absolutely nothing in this to deal with that. Not alone that, but the measures are going to actually worsen the housing crisis, if that's possible. And I don't stand here to give a doomsday. I stand here from the basis of experience, having been elected in 1999 in the City Council in Galway and watched the waiting lists grow month on month, year on year. And the reason for that is because each government, Fianna Fáil, PDs, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour, have utterly reliant on the private market, which has got us into a mess in the first place. And again, we have a false debate about those who won't support on the left the private market. There is a role for the private market, but not free rein for the private market. And so if we take Galway as a microcosm of the country, and in the latest Housing Quarterly Report, which is the end of October, and again, I use these figures not to be parochial, but to make points as to how the housing crisis is getting worse and worse, despite the Rebuilding Ireland document and the roadshow, which I really refer to as a circus, travelling the country with the Minister Simon Coveney. And prior to that, we had Minister Alan Kelly with the same type of bombastic rhetoric and not dealing with the problem or even analysing the problem in the first place. So if we look at Galway, the last time that a social house was built in Galway was 2009. That is the last time that we built a house in Galway. Yes, there have been houses under the voluntary schemes, but the last time that we had a direct build was 2009. We're now in 2016. No house was built this year. Next year, there's a plan for 14 houses. A total of 14 houses next year. They were part of an overall scheme, 60-something. Permission was given under Part 8 in my time for those houses. And the question has to be asked, why aren't they being built? And I understand somewhere between the City Council in Galway and the Department of the Environment lies the truth, or the Department of Housing. And it would seem that the Department of Housing have told the City Council to go back and re-look and see can they get more houses in on that site. And so we have a delay for some reason. I would have expected a minister to say to the City Council, what land have you zoned residential? Tell me precisely where that land is, what planning permissions are extant on it, and what do we need to do with you to build those houses. That would be a practical approach. Without a social housing build, we're going to have a housing crisis. Yes, we need the private market, as I've said, but we need a direct build from the City Council of a mixture of houses. And this was done in the past, and that's why we kept the housing crisis at bay until such time as we stopped that and we took the councils out of it. And again, under the guise of rhetoric, the Minister and the Government is saying that there is a massive social housing build. There is not. And under this budget, we are giving 110 million to HAP, 137 to rent allowance and 200 million in relation to infrastructural projects, which really means that we're going to ask the private developer to do us a favour and use the land that we zoned residential and bought when the market was booming to take over that land and build. And so what we're doing in the Finance Act under various measures, including the first-time buyers grant, which is really a direct benefit to the landlord, and under the other measures that are in there, is utterly relying once again on the private market, which has caused the problem in the first place. And in Galway City, as we speak, there are 4,720 households on the waiting list. Now, there's much talk about Dublin. Galway has 4,720 households. At a conservative estimate, that's somewhere between 13,000 and 15,000 people in a city of 72,000 who are on a waiting list for a house since 2002. The only game in town, we're told, is the housing assistance payment, and under this budget, as I said, a phenomenal figure in addition was given to what was already there to fund the housing assistance payment. And what that means for the ordinary person listening and watching is that you are taking off the waiting list, you go into a private house with no security of accommodation, you move at the landlord's whim from the east of the city to the west of the city, you move your children from school, and with all of the other consequences of the lack of tenure and lack of security. And that is the only game in town, the housing assistance programme. But even worse than that, we're using limited staff resources to administer that in Galway. And the only delay on rolling it out is the lack of staff to roll it out. And when somebody goes on the housing assistance payment, they're taken off the waiting list. And simply what's going on here is a massaging of waiting list figures and a failure to deal with the housing crisis. So rather than having a huge housing waiting list, we're now going to have a huge transfer list. And nobody in the government has looked at the equity of that, nor the legal basis for that, nor how somebody in a HAP might get priority to go into a local authority house when the landlord sells the house. Or somebody in a homeless situation, and we have 36 families in this quarterly report, and they're staying in for-profit hotels, for-profit hostels, and various others, B&Bs throughout the city. 32 families at any given time in Galway City. And so the question has to be asked then, when they turn up, rightly so, and declare themselves homeless at the City Council offices, the staff are under pressure to house them. So when an empty local authority house becomes vacant, chances are that they might get that house because of the pressure. And so we have a complete inequality built into the service for those waiting patiently from 2002 and those who get into difficulty and our hearts go out to them and turn up homeless. And so we have a complete mess in relation to a just and equitable allocation scheme. A measure of the difficulty is seen under the rent-a-room scheme, which now has increased to 14,000. And you'd imagine at some stage that we would think rationally and logically and say, how are we going to bring in a budget that will help reduce the housing crisis, bring in public transport, look at long-term unemployed and look at indigenous industry in the country, which is equally as important as the foreign direct investment. And yet we seem to go down the road all of the time of tinkering with the system. And when you're forced by the opposition to do something, you do it in the most minimal of way. For example, in relation to Section 54, you're given a break up to the 1st of May, and significantly it's Workers' Day. So you're giving the big tax evaders a break and bringing it in on Workers' Day on the 1st of May 2017. If that's not ironic, I don't know what is. So I take this opportunity, Alaska Corla, without any hesitation in using my voice to say that this is a most unequal budget, and I will not be supporting this Finance Act, although there are some good measures in it that I've referred to in a previous speech and I will come back to.
Thank you, Deputy.